Hi, and welcome to the Be Courageous Online Summit. My name is Tracy Tadero, and I'm a self-love mentor and life coach. And the intention for this summit is to provide support and encouragement for everybody that's going through any kind of turmoil during these unprecedented times of adversity and crisis. And today we have a very special guest, Dr. Robyn L Gobin, who is a licensed clinical psychologist, author, educator, meditation teacher, and podcaster who is passionate about helping women love themselves fully and unconditionally. She is a nationally recognized expert on interpersonal trauma and women's mental health. She has several years of experience as a trauma therapist, supporting survivors in reclaiming their mental health. Her latest book, The Self-Care Prescription: Powerful Solutions to Manage Stress, Reduce Anxiety, and Enhance Well-Being, aims to teach people how to take better care of themselves, mind, body, and spirit. Welcome, Dr. Robyn. How are you?
I am fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Yeah, you've got some amazing experience here in trauma and self-care, and that's just such a big part of what people are experiencing right now. And I know even though, we're all going through the same thing, everybody's responding to it in a different way. So I know from my own personal experience, it activates some uncomfortable emotions
Oh,
around
definitely.
of survival, right? And being safe and just having what we need. It's really fascinating how it's triggered that, and I can speak from experience on myself personally. So share with me kind of what you're seeing overall with some of your clients as far as what they're dealing with right now during this pandemic.
Yeah, I think it's what you talked about, that kind of uncertainty triggers a lot in all of us. And I think it's particularly challenging for folks who maybe already have had a trauma history or have a background of struggling with anxiety. It could just really tap on that vulnerability that they already have, and make one feel out of control in their lives, and feel very fearful about where do they go in the future, and what can they do to still move forward and try to be productive as possible, given that it appears that this new reality that we have is not going to be a sprint, but more of a marathon for us. And it doesn't look like it's stopping anytime soon. So that's like the main question is like, how do I kind of cope with this? And how do I accept that this is a reality that we're going through now? And how do I then still create a life that's meaningful and purposeful to me in the midst of all of the uncertainty and the worry that I'm experiencing?
Yeah, I think that's a lot of what is being felt. So one thing I want to tap on real quickly, because you are, you do specialize in trauma, and I think trauma is such a uncomfortable word for people, and they don't want to admit that they were experienced trauma, and trauma doesn't have to be a major, massive tragedy, right? I mean, there can be little T's, I call them, right? That could have happened from a childhood experience over and over again of living in, a dysfunctional environment or not having enough food as a child. And so can you share a little bit about if people are experiencing strong emotions right now, different than what other people are experiencing around them, what would you share with them about maybe being able to take it a little bit deeper and try and identify a core wound for somebody that has an overreaction to a situation, and they're not sure where it's coming from or why it's happening?
Yeah, so I would definitely say for folks who are experiencing really significant and intense emotions during this time, the first thing that I would just say is that nothing's wrong with you. that a lot of people are experiencing really strong and intense emotions. The circumstances that we are experiencing definitely play a role in that and influence us feeling that way. So the first thing is just to normalize your experience. And I think it's particularly so if you have a history of trauma, maybe from childhood or from adulthood or adolescence, that this time, because a core piece of trauma is not feeling safe, having your life be threatened or be in danger. And so a lot of times, even right now, our livelihoods are in danger for some people. They don't know how they're going to be able to pay their bills or where the next paycheck is coming from. And that's very distressing for people. And so the first thing I would just say is that this is normal. The emotions that you're having are normal. And I would say don't let the fact that other people aren't feeling those same emotions make you feel like something's wrong with you. As you said earlier, Tracy, we all are going through the same thing, but experiencing it very differently. And that's going to be a function of our backgrounds, a function of what's happening in our current environments. I know there have been studies showing the rate of domestic violence is up right now with folks kind of having a shelter in place. So there's a lot of factors that play a role. And so one practical skill that I'll say that I think could be really helpful when you're experiencing really intense emotions would be to validate yourself. A lot of times we look for people outside of ourselves to tell us that what we're feeling is valid, that it makes sense. But we can also offer that to ourselves. We can look at our history and say, gosh, I'm feeling very unsafe right now. It makes sense that I'm feeling that way given these things in my history, given what I'm experiencing right now. And what that validation does is it helps you to be able to accept what you're feeling. And so you don't have to feel like you need to run away from it or try to make it any different than what it is, because I think that's a challenge, and that's how we kind of exacerbate pain that we have. So there's a equation that says pain plus resistance equals suffering. And so when we're already in emotional pain and we resist that pain, try to make it different or try to act like it's not there, try to medicate it away, whatever all of those strategies are, we kind of create increased suffering on top of the pain that we already have. And so it's really important to accept that this is where I am, and just embrace. And you don't have to like that you're experiencing the pain. Of course, all of us would love to feel happy and joyful all the time, but being a human means experiencing the full rainbow of emotions. And so sometimes that includes sadness, it includes regret, despair, even at times. And so I think just really validating that emotion and making space for it and getting curious about what is this tied to, or what in my history or my background or my experiences makes this emotion valid, and then actually verbally validating yourself, telling yourself that it's okay that I feel this way. No, I don't like feeling this way, but it makes sense why I feel this way, and it's okay. It's not a crime to feel these emotions. And then I think that puts you, when you're not resisting or you're not trying to make it something different than what it is, then that puts you in a position to say, okay, what is the next most effective thing for me to do in this situation? Whether it's reaching out for support from someone who's a trusted advisor or mentor in your life, whether it's seeking therapy, which can be very helpful, particularly if there's some unresolved issues that you just haven't dealt with. And now during these times when we're sheltering in place and social distancing is triggering a lot of that, this can be a great time to start therapy, or to maybe grab a self-help book and see if that can support you during this time. But I think the main thing that you want in your life when you are experiencing these intense emotions is support. And one thing to remember with the self-validation is you can be a part of giving yourself that support, and then also you can reach outside of yourself to folks who are trained, like mental health professionals, who can really help you unpack what's going on for you and really help you to develop some effective and healthy ways of coping with your emotions, so that your emotions are not in the driver's seat of your life, dictating all of your behaviors and dictating your relationships.
Thank you. Thank you. I know you touched on resistance, and that is where I noticed for myself the worst pain comes from. And I experienced it this morning. Here I was feeling a little overwhelmed, and it was just like, no, 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 Tracy, keep it together, keep it together. And it just kept growing. It was like that pressure
Yep.
in the balloon. And I had to stop and I had to acknowledge what I was feeling. And it's like deflating the balloon, right? It
I
kind of,
love that analogy. I
and
love that analogy.
with that resistance, it's just, I became so uncomfortable because I was just trying to stop it. And
Mm-hmm.
no, you have to be on. You're about to do a Zoom interview, and
Mm-hmm.
this is not the time. And you know what? Those emotions, they mandate the time, not you.
Exactly, exactly. I like to think about it like a baby or a toddler, like when they're crying or they're upset, the more that you try to hush them or, make them quiet or tell them to stop, the more they ramp up because their needs are not being heard and not being met. And so it's the same thing with our emotions. When we just try to stuff in and say, no, I don't have time for you right now. Leave me alone. Let me eat a little bit more so that you can leave me alone, or let me go shopping so you can leave me alone. Those emotions, they might get quiet for the moment, but they're still there because there's an underlying need that needs to be addressed. And so we have to eventually do that. And why not now that we have this time to ourselves? And that's another thing that I've seen with my clients is that some of the maybe underlying challenges or personal struggles that they've been kind of putting off and saying, I don't have time to delve into that right now. Well, a lot of that is coming up for people because they do have a lot of time by themselves and they're spending a lot of time in their heads. And so these issues are coming to the light for them. And I definitely think that's an invitation when these things present themselves, whether they're thoughts or memories or emotions, to go ahead and address them and deal with them because there can be recovery and there can be support throughout that. You don't have to deal with it alone. I think that's one of my main messages too. A lot of times people feel like I shouldn't be feeling this way, particularly if it's something that happened in childhood or several years ago. People kind of adopt the narrative that, well, I should be over this by now. And the thing I'll say about trauma is just that it was never meant for you to have to deal with trauma in your life. None of us took a course in school about how to deal with trauma, how to cope with trauma. So it's not expected that you should get over it, if you will, or deal with it or cope with it by yourself. We definitely need support in getting through some of those experiences because they were never meant for us to experience. Nobody deserves to experience that. And so it's not a expectation that you should have to deal with it by yourself.
Yeah, I agree. And there's tons of support out there. Like Dr. Gobin said, counselors, therapists, and then there's support groups too. And I just want to touch really quickly on, I know the term PTSD is kind of a little more well known right now, and people think, military or the war, and it's going through constant childhood trauma, whether it's emotional neglect, whether it's not having your needs met, whether it's a parent that expected perfectionism from a child. I mean, those are all situations that can cause that PTSD. And so I would just like to bring an awareness to people, because when you have those extreme emotions and you think everybody else is responding the same way, but you don't see everybody responding the same way, like you were talking about, understanding it's okay. And so can you touch a little bit on PTSD and I guess maybe clarifying for a little bit to people of what they can learn about it to see if they connect with that? Because I know once you identify it, it's almost like a sigh of relief to be able to, oh gosh, it all makes sense now. Can you touch a little bit on that, please?
Yeah, I will definitely touch on it with the caveat I will say is that definitely don't self-diagnose yourself is the main point. So just because you're hearing me talk about this and you may see yourself reflected in some of the symptoms that I'm going to talk about, I would caution you and say that the only person that can really diagnose you with a diagnosis like PTSD is a trained mental health professional. Because as you mentioned, some of those experiences in childhood are definitely traumatic and others are just extremely stressful, and they definitely linger with us throughout time. And there's different variations of how that impacts people. So some people experience trauma and they don't go on to develop PTSD. Actually, the research shows us that the minority of people who experience traumas go on later to develop PTSD. So that speaks to our resilience as human beings and as a human race. And so, but some folks folks, they do kind of get stuck in that recovery process and that natural recovery that we see with most people, and they do develop PTSD, and it stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. And so the first thing that's
Sorry,
required.
can you say that again, because you cut out as you were
Oh, I'm sorry.
saying
Yeah,
that?
so it's called post-traumatic stress disorder. And so that's what PTSD stands for. And so the first thing that's required in order for you to even potentially be diagnosed with PTSD is that you have to have a history of a traumatic experience. And so what we consider to be a traumatic experience is something where your life was essentially threatened, something like a natural disaster, a car accident, even sexual assault, whether it's during childhood or during other parts of your life. As you mentioned, military experience where you were like in a combat zone and maybe your life was threatened in that context. So we're thinking about those kinds of experiences. And then there's also other things like domestic violence. There's various forms of consistent oppression or racial trauma that could potentially lead to PTSD symptoms for folks. And so when we look at the symptoms, then the symptoms involve typically people avoiding reminders of the trauma. So avoiding thinking about the trauma, avoiding certain places, people, or things that might trigger them to think about the trauma or experience flashbacks from the trauma. So a huge piece of what actually propels PTSD and keeps it going and maintains it is this avoidance. And so in therapy, what we do with folks who are struggling with PTSD is help them kind of identify those traumatic triggers or reminders that they may be avoiding, and help them to safely confront those reminders so that they're not avoiding them all the time. Because what we find is when we set up our life in such a way to try to avoid ever thinking about the trauma or being reminded of the trauma, what happens is you box yourself in a very small corner where there's several rules about places you can't go or things you can't do or people you can't see, people you can't be around. And while that makes you feel safe, what it's doing is creating a very limiting life where you can kind of rob yourself of the opportunity to have the full, rich experiences that we like to have in our lives. And so it's really about how do you create a life that's full of meaning and full of flexibility, where you don't have to live by certain rules. So an example, a tangible example of this is if someone was in a car accident and now they are avoiding riding in cars because that was a traumatic experience. It was a near death experience for them during that car accident. They might say, well, I'm not going to ride in cars anymore. And so what we would want to help them with is how can you kind of get in a space where you can have a healthier relationship with cars so that you don't have to cut yourself off from ever riding in a car again. And you can really kind of assess how you can engage in that behavior again in a safe way. And this is with the idea of you having a more flexible, a more full life that's not dictated by these rules, and essentially that doesn't have PTSD in the driver's seat dictating what you will and you won't do. Because that's always my goal is what makes your life worth living? How can you create a meaningful life? And then what do we need to do to help you move towards that? So the avoidance is a huge piece. That's what I just talked about. Then there's also traumatic reminders with PTSD. So people will sometimes talk about having nightmares or having flashbacks during the day where they are remembering very vividly what happened to them, and having very difficult time experiencing calm during these times. A lot of when they have these memories, they experience a lot of physiological reactions to them. Some people might hyperventilate. They might notice that their heartbeat increases rapidly. They have a lot of different challenges related to being reminded of the trauma. So that's a huge piece, having these flashbacks and then having very visceral reactions to these flashbacks or these nightmares. So that's another piece. Another aspect of PTSD is difficulty concentrating, difficulty experiencing restful sleep. A lot of people with PTSD talk about not being able to sleep, and a huge part of that is that dealing with PTSD, you don't really feel safe. The trauma has left you in a place where you don't feel safe. And so if you think about it, in order to sleep, you have to kind of let your guard down enough to be willing to kind of let go and just let the relaxation and the sleep take over. And what a lot of trauma survivors find is that when they lay down at night, their brain starts racing and they start thinking about different anxieties, worries that they have, and they start just feeling very unsafe. And so that keeps them from having that restful sleep. And so as you can imagine, because sleep is so integral to our ability to function, that creates a whole host of other challenges that people have with regard to being able to concentrate during the day, or even being a little bit more irritable in relationships. Which takes me to a different symptom category, which is changes in the way that people experience their mood, and also the way that they think about themselves in the world. And so a lot of times folks with PTSD will talk about having more limited emotional experiences than before the trauma. And a lot of times these emotions center around maybe sadness, depression, anger, and irritability. And so or people will just say they feel numb, so they don't feel anything. Before, they used to be able to connect with a variety of positive and more difficult emotions, and now it's either just a bunch of difficult emotions or it's just numb. And so that is how their emotional experiences change. And with regard to thoughts, a lot of people will talk about not having a high view of themselves, not having a positive outlook on other people. So for example, with someone who may have experienced sexual assault that was perpetrated by a male, sometimes people will, in order to protect themselves and to feel safe, they'll say, well, all men are perpetrators and I need to stay away from all men. And so in therapy, what we like to try to help people do is work through those thoughts and see how useful is that thought, like this kind of black and white thinking that all men, because you experience this event, all men now are perpetrators and want to harm you. How does that way of thinking get in the way of you reaching your goals, particularly if someone wants to be in a heterosexual relationship with a male in the future? Having that thinking process can get in the way. So how can we help you to realize that there are real threats out there? So we're not talking about putting on rose-colored glasses and just saying that, you are always safe everywhere you go. That's not realistic. What we're talking about is how do you make rational kind of choices informed by your own intuition and informed by what your experiences have been, so that you can be able to have thoughts that are more effective for you and allow you to move forward in your life in a meaningful way. And so that's a huge piece of that too. So those are just some of the symptoms that we definitely look for with PTSD. And I will say a lot of folks may experience things where they don't necessarily meet the full criteria for PTSD that we will be looking for, but they still are very distressed because they have some symptoms of post-traumatic stress. And that is something that definitely a therapist can help you work through as well, because you don't have to have full-blown PTSD for you to benefit from therapy services. Sometimes you have one or two of those symptoms that are very distressing, very extreme, and they interfere with your life, and that would be grounds for seeking mental health support. And what I'll say about that is sometimes people have barriers around seeking mental health treatment. One of them can be stigma. So in our country, even though we're talking about therapy more, we're hearing celebrities talk about being in therapy, we even have family members who may disclose that they're in therapy, there's still this underlying stigma. And particularly I know in communities of color, there's this idea that therapy is only for crazy people. and I don't want to be perceived as crazy, so I don't want to go to therapy. And that could not be further than the truth. In my opinion, everyone can benefit from therapy. Everyone can benefit from having a neutral person who is just there only to help you, who has been trained in how to help you navigate some of life's most significant challenges and really to support you along that journey. Like, who can benefit from that? And so I think regardless of what your background is, like anybody can benefit from therapy. So I want to debunk that myth that is just for crazy people. Another myth that's out there too that sometimes stops people from seeking therapy is that it's super expensive and that they can't afford it. And so what I'll say to that is check your insurance. If you have insurance through your job, check their benefits, because a lot of times you have benefits through your job or through your career that you have that they will cover a significant portion of therapist fees. And then another piece to that is if you're not working or you don't have insurance coverage, check with different therapists that you might find in your area, because they sometimes have sliding scale options where they will give you a fee that is reasonable based on the income that you bring in. So look at that as an option. So I'll say those are definitely some options, but I definitely want to just try to debunk some of those myths that are out there that keep people from really utilizing services that are readily available to them, and that can be very useful in helping them to create the life that they want to live and that they deserve to live.
Yeah, it can provide freedom for people. I'm not ashamed to say I went through years of counseling trying to dig up my discomfort and wounds and work through some old trauma, and it literally saved my life. And I wouldn't be
Yep.
doing this summit had I not done the work and
Yep.
really faced some uncomfortable, painful things. And I was just going to share really fast, talking about these old wounds. About a month ago, I was at the grocery store, when the shelves were all wiped out of paper
Yep.
products, all that stuff. And I saw those empty shelves and I just started getting this anxiety. And I was like, oh my gosh. And 2 times I went to the store and experienced the same thing. And so I just came back home and I sat with it and I realized growing up, my mother stocked so much stuff. I mean, she would have closets full of toilet paper. I mean, she'd have 10 jars of chicken stock. And so there was this, feeling of she was afraid of running out of stuff.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And it activated that trauma going to the grocery store. And
Mm-hmm.
I connected the dots. I was just like, wow, that's fascinating. And then I was able to release it. But I mean, we're all experiencing little things that we have no idea where it's coming from. So thank you for sharing all of that valuable information and just indicators and resources, because I think that's so important for people to have that. So going into the next segment that we wanted to talk about, you are a pro and a specialist in self-care. And
Yes.
I would love for you to share with our viewers about that, and also extending it into the idea that self-care is selfish. And I think a lot of people think that way. So I'll have you share on that, please.
Yeah, so I would venture to say that most people who are watching this have heard of the term self-care. I think it's all the rage these days. It's in magazines, it's, on TV, and people are, always talking about treating themselves and really taking better care of themselves. And I would say that there's different levels of self-care. And I think one of the ways that self-care has gotten a bad rap is that people feel like self-care is only bubble baths and manicures and pedicures. And what I'll say about that is that that's one level of self-care, but then there is a deeper level of self-care as well that involves engaging in activities that really help to nurture you. They help to recharge you on a deeper level, things that help you to feel healthy, happy, and effective in your life. That's my definition of self-care. So what can you do to help yourself feel healthy, happy, and effective in your life? And what I mean by effective is doing what works for you, rather than kind of going along with the crowd or trying to do what other people say works for them, but thinking the thoughts that are effective for you in your life, that move you forward to goals that you have for yourself, and then engaging in effective actions that really help move you forward in your life. And so then what I'll say about self-care being selfish, this is particularly something that women that I've talked to have struggled with a lot, particularly women who might be mothers, who have children. They feel like my time is limited. perhaps if they're working, I'm spending time at work, and then I come home, my kids only have a limited time with me. And so I couldn't fathom taking time away from them because, you know, I signed up for this for being a mom and they deserve to get that time for me. And so I couldn't fathom taking that away from them. And so I only have time for them and no time for myself. And so what I say about that is that think about the version of the mother that you're giving your children, or even if you're not a mother, think about the version of you're giving. If you're someone who is a business owner, what are you giving your employees? Or if you work for someone else, what version of yourself are you giving your boss or your coworkers? If you're partnered, what version of yourself are you giving your partners? And the analogy I love to use is if you were making a Thanksgiving meal and having people over to your house, would you warm up some 2-week-old spaghetti that you had in the back of your refrigerator and dish that up for Thanksgiving and give people that? Most people would say no. They would go to the store, buy, you know, fresh meat, buy fresh produce, fresh vegetables. They would get a nice fresh meal and really kind of put their best foot forward. And so when we don't engage in self-care, it's just like we're serving up that 2-week-old batch of spaghetti to the people in our lives. They're getting the leftovers after we've poured out into everything else. They're just getting a leftover version of us. And so why self-care is not selfish is because once you take care of yourself, the people in your life get a better version of you. And the very definition of something being selfish is that you only benefit from it. But that's not the case with self-care, because the other people in your life benefit tremendously from you taking care of yourself. When you recharge yourself, just like we recharge our phones at the end of the day, the battery builds up and then it can give us the best performance. And so we do that when we charge ourselves and we take time away for ourselves to engage in self-care. That is allowing us to give from the overflow and give the best version of ourselves to the people that we love and to leave the impact that we're really hoping to leave in this world. And another piece about self-care that I'll say, in addition to being selfish, people say, well, I don't have time or I don't have the resources for self-care, because it's built up to be something where you need to have a bunch of money for, or you need to have this extravagant Hawaiian vacation. That's like people's definition of self-care. And I think that's really relevant given the times that we're living in now, and maybe people's summer travel plans having to be canceled because of what we're going through. Self-care does not have to be extravagant, and it doesn't have to be time consuming. It can be as simple as going out on a walk, giving yourself a break, giving yourself some fresh air in the middle of the day. It can be as simple as snuggling on the couch with your pet and really getting in some good snuggles with them. Self-care is not always pleasant. So like those things I said, a walk or snuggling with your pet, those things are pleasant. Sometimes self-care looks like saying no. Setting boundaries in relationships, that is a form of self-care. Of not going out with someone who wants to go out with you because you know they're not a good person for you, cutting off relationships that no longer serve you. That's also self-care. That's not fun. And so, you know, self-care is always going to serve you in the end, but sometimes, just like that cold medicine that our mothers used to give us when we were younger, it doesn't taste good while it's going down all the time. Some forms of self-care do. They're very pleasant. Others are not so pleasant. I think we have to kind of have that right balance of what do I need? Again, going back to my definition, what do I need to help myself feel healthy, happy, and effective in my life? And then having the courage to give myself that. But one thing that you have to do in order to know what you need is actually spend time with yourself and ask yourself these questions. What do I need to be healthy, to feel happy, and to feel effective in my life? And sometimes I think one of the blessings of this time that we have for people who are privileged enough to be just in their homes and not having to go out, and who can social distance, we have time with ourselves to really check in and say, okay, how am I doing on the self-care front? What do I really need? What is the most nurturing and caring thing that I can give myself in this moment? And you have to take time to really listen to your intuition and hear from yourself what it needs, and then to have the courage to give yourself that. So it does require you to slow down and ask yourself those questions and really tune in and listen, and then be bold bold and courageous enough to dare to spend some time for yourself, because, you know, everyone else is worthy of your time, but so are you.
That's a great reminder for everybody. Thank you. So I just want to, I know you have, and I don't know how much you touched on, if you want to kind of, we have a few minutes left, touch real quickly on the 6 aspects of self-care. I know you kind of covered
Mhm.
a broad range, but is there a little more detail you want to get into about that?
Yeah, definitely. I'll just mention the 6 different types of self-care. So there's 6 different domains that I like to talk about, or ways that you can pour into yourself to refresh and recharge. There's social self-care, which is all about like, how are you connecting? We're social beings. We were born that way. We can't help it. And so we need those social connections. So healthy mental in our lives, healthy relationships in our lives. So what are you doing to cultivate and have healthy relationships and really take care of yourself socially? We're not meant to live in isolation. So there's social self-care. There's emotional self-care, which we kind of talked about earlier when I was talking about really accepting your emotions. So how do you show up for yourself when you're experiencing difficult emotions? Do you allow yourself to experience them? And do you have coping strategies that help you really navigate when you're having challenging emotions? So that's emotional self-care. Then there's physical self-care, which we're all aware of, which is, you know, eating foods that are going to really nourish your body and help it to perform at its best state, as well as incorporating movement into your life, whatever type of movement that you enjoy. And then another part of physical self-care is the sleep, which I hit on earlier, which is so important. We have to have a balance between moving and taking care of ourselves in that way, exercising, but then also getting restful sleep, because that's how we function at the best of our ability. Then vocational self-care is the 4th type of self-care, is really about, how do you take care of yourself at work? Do you have a nice balance between work and personal life? And then also, do you have a aspect of your identity that is detached from what you do? Because a lot of times in our lives, we were raised, we saw models where that's the way people identify themselves, is by what they do, but you're so much more than the job that you perform or the career that you have. And do you have a clear sense of who you are outside of that work identity? That's a part of vocational self-care. And also, when people are finding themselves in challenging work situations now, like maybe frontline workers who are stressed out, very worried going to work, you know, about the health of themselves, the health of their families, like, how are you taking care of yourself and really acknowledging those emotions and making space for all of that, and still showing up and doing your job? Then there's intellectual self-care, and this is really all about, we know that our bodies need exercise and movement to stay strong, but your brain also needs some exercise in order for it to kind of stay sharp and for your memory to stay intact as you age. And so these can look like things that really you're giving your mind mental exercise, whether that's learning a new language or engaging in puzzles, or doing things like escape rooms that, when we are able to go back out, that are kind of give your mind a bit of a challenge. I think this really promotes creativity and helps you think more broadly and expansively about how to solve problems that you may face in your life. And then the last aspect of self-care is spiritual self-care. And this is really realizing that you exist beyond what you see when you look in the mirror, that there's a spirit, an essence to you. This has nothing to do with religion, but more so about you just recognizing that there's an essence to you, a spirit, a deeper level of you that needs to be nurtured, and that centers around like having meaning, having purpose, having a sense of feeling connected to something that is larger than you. And there are ways that we can nurture that aspect of ourselves too. And so all of these 6 aspects of self-care are there are strategies that you can implement and engage in that can really help you to feel like you're taking care of yourself in all 6 of these domains, which is what I address in the book that I wrote, The Self-Care Prescription.
Fabulous. That's wonderful to hear you state it like that, because I didn't even, I mean, we all know about different aspects of self-care, but you took it a little bit deeper, where those are all crucial elements to it. So
Mm-hmm.
thank you for that. So as we wrap up here, I just want to ask, what final words of encouragement do you have for our viewers on being courageous?
Yeah, I think definitely for being courageous, it's just know that you can have your emotions and still be courageous, right? You don't have to be fearless and be able to kind of do the things that you want to do in your life, that you can take your fear along with you, take your anxiety along with you as you're moving towards your values, your goals, the things that you care about in your life. And circling back around to what I said earlier, there's nothing wrong with you for feeling fearful, for feeling anxiety, for feeling scared. Sometimes that's a normal human experience. And those emotions do not have to get in the way or stop you from doing the things that you care about. It's just a matter of how you create the relationship with those emotions so that you're more so in the driver's seat than the emotions are.
Thank you. Thank you. That was so beautiful. Thank you for just everything you've shared. And I think it's important for each of the viewers out there to know that you're worth it. Each and every one of you
Yeah.
are worth it.
Yeah.
So you don't have to suffer. You don't have to struggle. There are resources out there. There are amazing counselors and therapists out
Yep.
there. Dr. Robyn is available through her website, which we'll share the link to that. And just hopefully this provided some valuable information for people to go, wait a minute, wow, I relate to that. I had no idea. I need a little bit more support.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
anyways, we will step into the next segment of Dr. Robyn is providing a book of hers that she'll be giving away on her website. The link will be below where you can sign up to be entered into that giveaway for her fantastic book, which is called The Self-Care Prescription, correct?
Yep.
Powerful Solutions to Manage Stress, Reduce Anxiety, and Enhance Well-Being. What better time to read that now? So I thank you so much, Dr. Robyn, for sharing everything that you've provided for our viewers. And I know on behalf of them, there's great appreciation for you being a part of this summit so people can be educated and take some steps to take care of themselves during these times. So with that, I just say to everybody, continue to be courageous. And we are signing off with love and light.
Take care.